The next thing is to go to the voters. I know this is not something that we've done a lot in the Northeast and in New England, but it's definitely a trend that's happening across the country, particularly in fast-growing parts of the Intermountain West and places like Phoenix and Las Vegas and Denver and Salt Lake City, these places that are building out massive expansions, particularly to their transit systems. Dallas is another one. They're getting that money by going to the voters, telling them what they're planning to do, telling them how much it's going to cost, here's how we're going to pay for it, and they're approving these things. 70-75% of these things pass every election day. And the 25% that don't pass are probably stupid projects to begin with. So the voters are really good at picking out when these things matter and when they really make sense for these metro economies. In Los Angeles, which this chart shows, they went to the voters in the middle of the recession when unemployment in LA County was 22%, something like that, and they still approved the sales tax increase for huge expansion of the transportation network there. Again, I know it's not really a tradition in the Northeast and in New England, but Rhode Island just recently, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, passed a bond referendum to pay for transit infrastructure throughout the state. So going to the voters, being clear about what you're trying to invest in, we think if the projects are right, that people are willing to pay for it. If you tell them. The third thing is land value capture. As we build out this transportation infrastructure, it opens up enormous opportunities for the private landholders that are around these transportation facilities. Not just highway interchanges, which is how we built out a lot of the suburbs for a generation, but also more particularly and more complexly around the transit stations. And if we're going to build these transit stations, whether it's light rail or BRT or anything else, there are opportunities to capture that value that accrues to these private landowners and help support the payment of those. And the last thing is on public-private partnerships. This is not just a selling off assets to the private sector, but there's so much money that's out there right now, so much money sloshing around the world that's not landing here in the United States, mostly because we've had a municipal bond market that has provided preferential tax treatment and didn't really need it. But again, as these financing and funding challenges get tighter, lots and lots of interest in the private sector in investing in U.S. infrastructure. They need to be paid back. They're obviously looking for a return. And we've seen some spectacular failures in this country that people are very concerned about. We've also seen a lot of successes. So again, as we're looking for things in the future, as we're looking for areas where states like Connecticut and cities and metros can maybe take advantage of these opportunities in the future, we know that there's money in the private sector that could possibly go for a whole host of different transportation and transit. Ironically enough, the federal government actually is a good example of this, where they have the program that awards money for new transit projects is now such a small success, but they're letting applicants describe transit access or job access as a factor that they might consider when they're awarding getting their money. That same kind of thing could happen in cities and states. Los Angeles is a place that's doing this. They're trying to understand, as we have new employers coming in, how can we reward them by making sure that the investment decisions they're making supports.
And is there a role for the business community in that as well? In some places, I think the leadership comes from the local business organization.
It's fits and starts. They talk about accessibility all the time. They know that getting their workers to work is critical for their bottom line. They've done a really good job concentrating development around new stations, not just light rail, but around BRT stations. That development has mostly been residential, because there's a lot of demand for residential around these stations. We've got to make sure that we flip that dial, and we don't just focus on residential, but we try to concentrate jobs around these transit stations so that we can get people better access to those employment opportunities.